Okay, let's start with a little game, maybe more like a trivia question. I'm gonna list some items, and then I want you to guess what they all have in common. Okay, you ready? M&Ms, like the candy, not the wrapper. Adele's album 21, a Nokia 1100 brick phone. Okay, I don't know if any of you have that. Probably not. The movie Avatar, the game or the app Candy Crush, and the novel Don Quixote de la Mancha, which you probably just know as Don Quixote. Okay, so go for it right now. What do you think they have in common? You can go ahead and yell it out loud at me on a screen. I can't hear you, but oh well, it's technology, people. That's right, they are the best sellers in their category. M&M's is the best-selling candy of all time. Maybe you love M&M's, maybe you hate them. I'm not sure how they beat out Snickers, but it's just true, right? And the best-selling movie, not Rogue One, not Titanic. You ever heard of Titanic? It was the movie Avatar. This was before your time, but this was a movie with the blue people. It was super weird, but bestseller of all time. And the last one, Don Quixote, I mean, it's #1 on the list of best-selling books. Bet you didn't see that one coming, right? Some of you may have never even heard of that book, certainly haven't read it, but it has sold over 500 million copies. That's crazy. That's almost 5 times as much as the first Harry Potter book, which makes it the best-selling book of all time, except that it's not. Okay, even though Don Quixote, as great as it probably is, has sold 500 million copies, it's estimated that the Bible has sold multiple billions. Yes, you heard me correctly, billions. It blows everything else out of the water. Along with some other religious books, it's left off most of the list because copies were sold long before there was an accurate way to keep count. So, a long time ago, people are buying copies of the Bible, but they're not really keeping track of it. And so now they don't consider it part of the bestseller list. But there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind in the world that the Bible is the #1 bestseller of all time. Did you know that? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Now, here are a few other things you may not have known about the world's all-time best-selling book. First, it's not actually a book. Okay, and I grew up believing that it was a book. It's actually a collection of documents. Some are letters, some are poems, some are history accounts, and some are prophecies. Okay, so it's not one book you read from beginning to end like Harry Potter. It's a collection of different documents and books. So there are 66 documents that have been combined together to create the Bible. Now, another thing you may not know, maybe you do, but it was written by dozens of different people. And it wasn't written all at once. It wasn't like a dozen people sat down and said, hey, you tackle the poems, I'm gonna work on the prophecies, and you work on narrative accounts. No, it was written over the course of more than 1,500 years. So I'm sure, right, all of those facts make you want to end tonight early so you can rush home and read your Bible cover to cover. Right, well, maybe not. Because here's what I know. Even if the Bible sits at the top of the bestseller list, it isn't always at the top of our list of things to read, right? And there are a bunch of reasons for that. For one thing, the Bible's old. It's a very old book. And another thing, and maybe based on the fact that it's old, it can be hard to understand. And not just for you as a teenager, for me as an adult, there are things that I read and I'm like, I have no idea what is being talked about right now. And listen, we don't even like reading things that aren't interesting, do we? So trying to get through something we don't even understand, like that's a tough sell. Also, the book is, in a lot of ways, about some dead people. You read about Noah and the ark, or Jonah and the whale, Father Abraham. You're like, these are people that lived and died a long, long time ago. The Bible's a long book. Again, like I just said, it's not a book, it's a collection of documents, but from beginning to end, the Old Testament and the New Testament, it feels like it's about 1 billion pages long, and it can just be confusing. I know some of you, maybe you've just opened your Bible and just read the first thing you saw. Well, it might have been something weird, right? Like how we're not supposed to boil a goat in its mother's milk or something, like really in the Bible, you should check that out, or maybe not. But you open up random passages and you don't know the context of it. It's like, man, that's a really, really strange thing. You probably already know what's in the Bible because your parents or student pastor or your small group leader has already told you the important stuff. So that's another reason why we don't read it sometimes, is because, you know what, I'm going to let my student pastor just tell me what I need to know out of it, or maybe my parents will tell me what's important, and I don't have to spend some time reading the rest of the stuff. Or maybe you really don't want to know what's in there, because then it's like, well, what if I feel guilty about something? What if I have to make some changes in my life because of what I read in the Bible? I don't want to read that. And let's be honest, how do we know that this collection of 66 documents written over 1,500 years by dozens of authors on 3 different continents is even true? Because that's the biggest question, isn't it? If it is true, then it makes sense that it's the best-selling book of all time. It's a game changer. But if it's not true, then nobody has time to read a book that big for nothing. If it's just one big, scam, then the last thing we want to do is put in the time and read it and put in the time and energy into trying to figure out what it says when all along it's not even true. So how do we know? How do we know if it's true or if it's not true? I wish that were a simpler question. The truth is, people spend years, sometimes their entire careers, researching and thinking and asking questions and debating and doing more research, trying to figure out all of the evidence that exists for the truth of the Bible. And we're not even going to cover all or even a large part of what they've discovered in the next few minutes. But just remember this, it isn't just one book. It's a collection of multiple letters and documents written by multiple authors. So while we can't talk through each of them specifically, you're welcome for that, by the way, we can look at one document that has the potential to help us understand the other documents better. And it's a letter written by a guy named Luke, and it's one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life found in the New Testament, which we call the Gospels. And it starts this way, okay? Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. Now, that very first word is a clue. Many. Now, what have many people done according to Luke? Well, many people have undertaken to draw up, to write and record an account, which means, hey, a bunch of people have tried to write down all of the things that happened when Jesus was around. Luke knew and was around when Jesus was around, and so he wanted to draw up an account of that. Many people took part in making that happen. And so apparently whatever was happening at the time, it was important enough for many people to write it down, which means something happened, and we have the writings of 4 people who wrote about that something being the life and death and coming back to life of Jesus. So their 4 documents, along with all of the documents and letters of the New Testament, were passed around and copied, and then they were passed around and copied and passed around and copied again. And Luke said many people wanted to get down on paper everything that had happened. And they did. And then it was copied by other people who wanted to share the news with other people. Think of it as like an ancient retweet, okay? I don't know if you guys use Twitter anymore, but back in the day, someone would tweet something and then you would retweet it, okay? Think of it like that. People are copying it. They are making sure that they can pass it on to people that they know, people in their circle of influence. And so as a result, here, years and years later, we have thousands of manuscripts with different dates on them. No originals, but copies and copies and copies of copies. So right now, you may be wondering, doesn't that mean that there would be errors because, everything was copied so many times? Well, I'm glad you asked that. No, we can take a look at a manuscript dated 250 AD and compare it to a manuscript of the same book dated 500 AD and see if anything had changed over the course of 250 years of copy. And you know what you discover when you study all of those manuscripts with such different dates? You find virtually no difference. Now, there's some spelling errors, there's some grammatical mistakes, there may be a word, missing or changed here and there, but for the most part, it lines up very close to almost perfect accuracy. And it's just fascinating how careful the scribes were. These were the guys who were in charge of copying these documents. They would check and recheck and check again to make sure that these letters, these stories about Jesus, were copied accurately and copied completely. But why? Why was it so important? Why would you spend so much time? You don't have a copying machine. You don't have a computer. You don't have a scanner back then. You're writing word after word, punctuation mark after punctuation mark. Well, it's because of what Luke was writing. Check out how he describes it, okay? Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, is what we just talked about. Just as they were handed down to us by those who, from the first, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, okay, understanding this, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. Now, I'm not exactly sure who Theophilus is, but Luke is saying that these aren't just stories he's writing down. He's recording what was told by the eyewitnesses, by the people who knew the truth about Jesus. In fact, there's a Greek word he uses to describe them. It's kind of hard to pronounce. You say it autoptes, okay? And I believe that's the way you say it. And it's similar to our English word autopsy, meaning the investigation that happens after someone dies. And I know that's kind of strange, but this isn't just storytelling for Luke. This is an investigation. That's what an autopsy does. They try to find out the cause of death, what happened. They do a lot of careful research and investigation. And that's what Luke is doing. He's doing research. And scholars agree that Luke was an educated man and he did his homework. He's not just making stuff up. And that's one reason why his account of Jesus' life is such a big deal. It's reliable, it's trustworthy, it's well researched, and it presents great evidence. And he wrote it down for a reason. Okay, and here's what he said: so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. That you may know the certainty. He did this so his friend Theophilus, whoever that is, can be what? Can be certain. Well, certain of what? Certain of the things that he has been taught about Jesus. So when you see these things and you read these things about Jesus, hey, you can be certain about them because I've done this research. I spent time and energy and effort making sure that he got it right. I don't want to mislead you. You're my friend. He did that so that his friend and so that we today can be certain that what is said about Jesus and what we believe Jesus said about God is trustworthy. It's reliable. What Luke is giving us is the one thing that can help clear up the confusion or the uncertainty about the Bible, and that's context. He's giving us the big picture, not only of who Jesus was, but also of the research he put in to making sure that Jesus' story was told in a clear and accurate way. Because what happened with Jesus was so extraordinary and so unbelievable that Luke had to write it down. And he had to write it down carefully to make sure that his reader understood that this was the real deal. He was right. Not only did Theophilus need it, we also need it. We need evidence. We need proof to know that this is trustworthy. Because if what Luke said is true, if Jesus was born, died, and raised back to life, then that changes everything. Jesus' story becomes the most important story ever told. His words become trustworthy. And following him and trusting him with our lives, well, that becomes a no-brainer. If all of this is accurate, then yes, of course we would want to follow Jesus. Who else would we follow? And Luke is just one author inside this collection of documents that we call the Bible. And my challenge to you is to discover more about it. Now, don't just brush that comment aside. Don't just say, oh yeah, sure, you're the video preacher, that's what you're gonna say. Look, don't throw the Bible out as untrue or useless until you've taken the time to at least consider it. I mean, it's the best-selling book of all time. After all time. And as someone who can decide things for themselves, you owe it to yourself to know why you do or why you don't believe what it says. I just challenge you to give it a shot. But how do you do that? Well, first is you approach it with some curiosity. Remember that this is the best-selling book of all time. There has to be something in there that makes billions of people want to own a copy of it and maybe even potentially read it. So like Luke, hey, spend some time investigating. Just approach it with some curiosity. And then start with the context. And what I mean by that is simply the backstory. It's the story that sets up the story. And it can help you better understand what you're reading. That's why all 4 accounts of Jesus' life begin with some kind of backstory. It's why Luke began with his investigation, When you understand what's going on around the story, okay, Luke's doing an investigation so that he can give a report to his friend Theophilus, then you better understand what's going on in the story, in the account, and it can give you confidence that you understand what you're reading. Context makes things clearer. I mean, think about it. You have a conversation with somebody and they're having a bad day and you ask them to explain why are you having a bad day, and they tell you the backstory, then all of a sudden you have a better understanding of why they're in the mood that they're in. That's just context. It makes things clearer for you as you approach them. Well, when it comes to the Bible, the same is true. When you have context, you understand it in a clearer way. And a great way to do this, to read the Bible with some context, is to get a version that will help you with this. For instance, Life Application Bibles are great for this, or you can Google information about each book within the Bible before you read it and learn some things. You can talk to your small group leader or your student pastor to help you kind of find a place that will help give you clear context to what's going on, that will help you understand who wrote it, who was it written to, so what's the audience here, when was it written, and why was it written to those people at that time? What was happening in the life of the reader that would lead the writer of this book or letter to send that to them? In fact, you can start with the book we talked about tonight, the book of Luke, or the follow-up written book that was also written by Luke called Acts. Not Axe as in Axe body spray, but Acts, A-C-T-S. And as you read it, remember, they were both written for Theophilus. So pretend you're Theophilus and your buddy Luke did some research to help you see things more clearly. And see if that helps. See if it helps you to just get started. I know that reading the Bible is challenging. I know that reading anything is challenging. A lot of you don't even like to read. Plus, people don't sit down and just read much anymore because it takes time and there's a risk of missing out on something else. There's also the risk of reading something that makes no sense to you or is kind of boring. But as you leave today, think about this, okay? Just think about this. What if it is true? What if the story of Jesus, as recorded by people like Luke, his death and being brought back to life, what if that's true? And what if the things Jesus taught and the things he believed to be true are just as reliable and trustworthy? And imagine if the words recorded in the Bible really did have the potential to change your life story. But what if all that was true and you never actually read it? What if it contained insights into how to live the life you were made for, but you never learned those insights? There is risk either way, but the reward when you read it, I believe, is so much greater. And context can make that clearer for you. So I want you to approach it with curiosity. Start your own investigation and find out for yourself why this is the #1 bestseller of all time.